Is the Nikon Zf still worth it in 2025? I have this camera since launch and the Nikon Zf is currently recording me. Spoiler alert, in my opinion, the Nikon Zf is still worth it in 2025, although it's a old camera. But there are two factors which might be deal breakers of you to not get this camera. By the way, I think it's the first time that I do a kind of a vlog style video with the Nikon Zf here, or this specific part of the video. This is the VILTROX 20mm 2.8. So what's your opinion about the image quality and the stabilization in this vlog style setup? As a long-time viewer, you might know that I had the Nikon Zf since launch day. And it's now about 1.5 years at the time of this recording. And I basically built up my channel based on the Nikon Zf by creating videos about the camera, but also using it to film my YouTube videos like I'm doing it right now, just to showcase you the image quality and how it can look like in a simple setup. And the way I shoot my videos, very basic. I just use it for talking headshots right now to illustrate you the image quality. And the lens I'm currently using is the VILTROX 24mm 1.8. Thanks to the wider aperture I get here in a darker setup, enough light, but also a little bit of background separation to achieve this typical YouTube headshot. And I'm quite pleased with the VILTROX lens. I have it now for a couple of months to shoot on the Nikon Zf. If I'm using the Nikon Zf to shoot an A-roll or my headshots, I was quite surprised because I got it quite affordable. If you're interested, the link is down below. But to not waste any more of your time, let me mention you one or two reasons why the Nikon Zf is definitely not your camera, even in 2025. And these points I basically highlighted since day one when I unboxed the Nikon Zf. And yeah, you can say that it hasn't changed much since then. The first reason is that the Nikon Zf is quite bulky and heavy, and therefore the ergonomics are suffering also because of that. And another reason, which is a matter of preference, and I know that a lot of Fujifilm users would prefer that, but in the Nikon system it's not that common, you could say. And that's the lens choices for the Nikon Zf, specifically smaller prime lenses or pancake lenses, and also the missing aperture ring. The VILTROX 24mm 1.8, which I'm currently recording on, that's one of the few lenses for the Z mount which does have an aperture ring. But unfortunately, it's not clickable like you know it on vintage lenses or like a M glass. But that kind of aperture ring is quite rare still in 2025. And if you are a person who prefers smaller, compact cameras, the Nikon Zf is definitely nothing for you, especially when you hold it in your hands and also find the ergonomics not fitting to yourself. In that cases, I think the Fujifilm cameras like the X-T5 would be a much better choice for you, simply because Nikon has put in a lot of features into this camera, and these features require space. For example, the quite impressive IBIS and other video features. And the Nikon Zf being a full-frame camera, therefore the lenses are of course much bigger compared to an APS-C system or a micro four thirds system. Because of the lacking ergonomics of the Nikon Zf, it's also quite uncomfortable to use the Nikon Zf with heavier lenses or bigger lenses. I have the 28 to 75 Nikon lens, which is a 2.8 zoom lens, which I think the weight is about 550 grams. And here I have to attach the Smallrig Grip on the Nikon Zf, otherwise I have the feeling that the drag forward is too much in my opinion. My daily driver is still the 40mm f2 lens. This is a nice lightweight, small compact lens for the Nikon Zf, and that's my personal way how I use the Nikon Zf regularly on a daily basis with small prime lenses. There are ways to improve the ergonomics on the Nikon Zf with certain accessories. You can check out this video up here, which I made a couple of weeks ago, but don't expect to get any kind of ergonomics like a Z6 3, Z8, or the latest release Z5 II. Another smaller con, you could say, is regarding the megapixels, especially if you want to compare it with the Fujifilm X-T5. The Nikon ZF has only 24 megapixels compared to the X-T5, which has, I think, 40 megapixels. But in my opinion, the way I shoot as a hobbyist and documenting my life, family, and so on, 24 megapixels are more than enough for my use case, especially since I have experimented and use also 10 megapixels, 13 megapixels like the Nikon D700. 24 megapixels are still a lot of megapixels for my use case, even if I crop a lot. But as I said, this highly depends on the way how you shoot or what's your preferences. If you are able to get over these cons, in my opinion, you are up for a really nice retro design treat. One big reason, in my opinion, is definitely the price of the Nikon ZF. Nikon has done an incredible job to make this camera available since launch, especially if you compare it with all the recent Fujifilm cameras, which are here and there out of stock. And because of this availability since launch, the Nikon ZF has dropped in price simply because it was available the whole time. And right now I see prices on MPB around 1,700 euros. If Nikon has any kind of spring, summer or winter sales, you can find the Nikon ZF also for 1,800 euros new. So if you compare it with the, for example, Fujifilm X-T5, here the prices on used market, they are around 1,600. You could argue that to get rid of your full frame itch, you can pay a couple of bucks more for the Nikon ZF and trade in the compact size and small lenses of a Fujifilm system to a full frame setup, which you might be itching because of all of social media. People are raving about the full frame look and so on. So you could first-hand experience that for a relatively good price for modern full frame camera in a retro designed body. Bonus thought about the full frame sensor is that Fujifilm users might have lusted over a full frame camera, which Fujifilm will probably never make. They are split between APS-C and their GFX medium format system lineup, and the Nikon ZF might be the system or camera to give you that full frame experience with the trade-off, as I mentioned, size, weight, and also aperturing, unfortunately. Another factor I really like on the Nikon ZF, and slowly other brands are putting something similar on their cameras, is a dedicated black and white switch. I thought at the beginning that this switch would be just a gimmick, but since I really like to shoot black and white, I do use it regularly, and the black and white images do turn out pretty amazing in my opinion, straight out of camera. Now, one of the main pros for the Nikon ZF is definitely the aesthetics in my opinion, and that's also the reason why I'm switching cameras, just to be able to showcase you the Nikon ZF in this part of the video. Because the Nikon ZF, as every one of you know, is a retro style camera and inspired by the FM2, I believe. And the aesthetics just appeals to a lot of people, and that's also one of the main reasons why I love this camera so much. Because of the retro design, it stands out from the masses of cameras nowadays. And I personally am just a fan of these retro dials. Here you have the ISO dial and the shutter speed. As I mentioned in the con section, unfortunately we don't have an aperturing here. How it would look like, I can quickly showcase you with this VILTROX 20mm lens, which I filmed before. Here you have an aperturing where you normally would expect it. But as you see and don't hear anything, you have a smooth aperturing. It's not clickable, unfortunately, but this VILTROX 24mm at least has it. And that's the way I would ideally prefer to shoot the Nikon ZF, having an autofocus lens with an aperturing, also having the ISO dial and the shutter speed dial. That's my preferred setup, you can say, because you have your complete exposure triangle on the camera. And to kind of achieve this experience, the only choice you have right now on the Nikon ZF is by using manual focus lenses, which I do love on the Nikon ZF because of the retro design dials and so on. And also I love this Voigtländer 40mm 1.2 lens because it renders the images quite beautifully. I might do a POV video in the future with this lens, but as you can see here now you have again your exposure triangle with the aperture ring, which just feels and clicks amazing in my opinion. And that's another pro for me. Using manual focus lenses on the Nikon Zf, it's quite a pleasure. Although the Voigtländer adapter I use, which supports close focusing for M lenses, is unfortunately not shipped, and therefore you don't get the focus confirmation on the Nikon Zf. But I personally prefer an accurate infinity focusing, because I had in the past the experience that if I use cheaper adapters, the infinity focus on M glass was not accurate. And the only solution I found, inspired by Samurai from Samurai Street Life, was this Voigtländer adapter. A lot of Fujifilm fans or Fujifilm users might say that these are kind of dials you already have on the XT lineup of Fujifilm. And that's originally where I'm coming from, you could say, because I had briefly the X-T4 and the X-T5. X-T5 only just for testing. And I also previously owned the X-T1. That's where my love basically come from, and why I like these retro design cameras. But I have to say that regarding build quality, the XT lineup from Fujifilm has declined in my opinion. The X-T1, 2 and 3, all of them I had in my hands once. The build quality is quite high. The dials feel very tactile and high quality. But with the X-T4 and now with the X-T5, in my opinion, they feel like a little bit cheap. That's at least my opinion. The X100 lineup is still high quality, but X-T5, it feels a little bit, cheaper compared to the older XT cameras. And here on the ZF, you definitely have a high build quality. Sure, you have some parts here on the camera, which is plastic, but also on the top, you have these brass dials. And I think the whole top plate feels like brass. And the beauty of brass is, of course, if you use it quite often and over the years, you get this brassing on all the dials and on the top plate. I was not able to brass this camera yet, although I use it quite often, but I also take care about my gear, so that might be the reason why I don't see any brassing yet. But I think that also speaks for the high quality of the Nikon Zf. And if you hold the camera in your hand, it just feels solid. And if you put it with the kit lens or one of the kit lenses here, the 40mm f2 lens, this is my daily combo. Yeah, it just looks great in my opinion. And what I experience is that if you shoot with a retro design camera, in my case the Nikon Zf, but I also experienced that with Fujifilm cameras, is that people on the streets, if you like to shoot street photography, just accept your way taking street photos. For example, this Nikon Zf, because of the aesthetics and retro design, that this is a film camera, and somehow people are more acceptable on the streets when I take this camera with me shooting on the streets. If I pull out DSLR or something like that, most people are more reserved, you could say. And that was definitely a positive surprise when I experienced that on the streets with the Nikon Zf. Another point which I really enjoy because of the aesthetics is that somehow this camera just inspires me to shoot, because I like to play with the dials and hearing the clicks. I like to hold the camera in my hands. That's the reason why, I just pick it up and shoot my kids, or when I go on the streets and take the camera with me. Somehow reminds me of the Leica cameras I own, because the camera just looks and feels quite nicely. It inspires you to pick it up and shoot with it. Same goes for the X100VI I owned in the past. But the retro design somehow assists me, you could say, to pick this camera up, play with it, and just shoot any kind of pictures. Of course, there are currently more retro design cameras on the market, which might give you the same inspiration or feeling just picking the camera up and go out to shoot. In my opinion, there are currently basically three cameras which follow that retro design language. First, of course, the Nikon Zf, which I'm covering right now in this video, and also the Fujifilm X-T5, which I briefly mentioned. And new in the game of retro design cameras is the OM system OM3, which has been released a couple of months ago at the time of this recording. Unfortunately, I hadn't the chance yet to try this camera out. But if you look at these three cameras, they cover very different niches regarding camera use cases. The Nikon Zf being a possible hybrid camera with a full frame sensor, the Fujifilm X-T5 being an APS-C camera, covers more of the smaller form factor. And if you want to go even more compact, the Micro Four Thirds solution from OM System with the OM3 is definitely also a nice solution. Plus, the OM3 has a lot of tech built in. I think all that computational photography stuff is packed in there, but at this time I haven't tried it yet. But from what I saw, it can be also a quite nice, very nice camera, especially if you are focusing on having a very compact system. Of course, I can also mention here the amazing image quality of the Nikon Zf, but I think nowadays no camera, especially in stills, does any bad images. If I look at my old DSLRs from Nikon, I have the D200 and the D700. These are decades old and still produces quite nice images. So of course this Nikon Zf produces very nice images and quality. And although it has the sensor from the Z6 Mark I, I think, the sensor still holds up until today, in my opinion. Now let's turn on E stabilization on, besides IBIS. And let's see how the stabilization will look like. One major point why I prefer Nikon in general over Fujifilm is definitely the autofocus system. Since the Z8, Z9, Nikon has improved enormously in autofocus, and these advanced autofocus systems are also in the Nikon Zf. And in the past I used the X-T4, X-T5 for testing, and also the X100VI. In none of these cameras, by the way, the X-T5 I had before the firmware was messed up, none of them are able to compare with the Nikon autofocus. And I personally do rely on autofocus to shoot my kids, especially when they are running around, if they are on a swing, but also for these very brief candid moments when one kid hugs another and in a split second the camera has to grab the eye correctly, and that the Nikon Zf was able to do that for me. That's my specific use case, that I want to have reliable autofocus just to be able to get these shots of special moments of my kids. Speaking of Fujifilm, in my opinion, Nikon has basically followed the footstep of OG Fujifilm regarding their Kaizen philosophy. If you look at the latest cameras from Nikon, the Z9, Z8 and now the Zf, all of them got amazing firmware updates with new features. Specifically for the Nikon Zf, when it was launched, I was also one of these people. We were complaining regarding the ISO dial, how auto ISO was kind of confusing to use. And they fixed it finally in the firmware update 2.0, where you can now put your ISO dial on C, set it up correctly. I made a video about that up here. And then you have auto ISO like on Fujifilm when it's on A. They are listening to customers and try their best to improve their cameras with firmware updates. Also with that new firmware update, the Nikon Zf kinda have access to film recipes, you could say. You are able to upload custom color profiles now via the Nikon Imaging Cloud. I haven't tested that in depth yet. I have to spend more time with that functionality, but for now it's quite nice. But the handling, it's a little bit finicky compared to Fujifilm in my opinion. But if you're curious about my opinion, stay tuned. I will upload a video about this topic in the near future. Another pro, which is not specifically for the Nikon ZF but for Nikon in general, is definitely their color science. I think this is something which was always the case, or especially in the DSLR age, but since mirrorless, a lot of people have jumped to Sony and Canon, mostly because of better autofocus. People were raving about the color science of Canon, which is great, but Nikon's color science is definitely one of the best. I personally, I'm not a pro editor, especially because I'm partly colorblind and prefer to edit my images into black and white. But when I do my editing in colors, I do feel it's, for me personally, easier to push the images into a direction which is pleasing for me. To be fair, here Fujifilm is also very great. I think among some opinions, the Sony files are the most difficult to push. I can't comment on that, but that's what I see in a lot of videos, that Nikon files and Fujifilm files are quite easy to edit, and Sony are a little bit more difficult. But I guess it's depending on your editing skill. Just a quick note from my side on this topic. Coming back to the Nikon ZF and also the size of the camera, I already mentioned before that because of the video specs Nikon has packed into this camera, I assume that's one of the reasons why the body is bigger compared to an FM2, which was inspired to get this camera design. If you want, you can definitely use the Nikon ZF as a hybrid camera. As I said, I did that when I restarted my channel with the Nikon ZF and use it both for video and photo. Nowadays I use the Nikon ZF mostly for stills. For this video I use it also for video, and here again I use it with that cheap VILTROX 20mm lens, recording in f-log. This specific segment is with IBIS on and electronic stabilization, therefore the image is slightly cropped in. I think the stabilization is doing a quite good job. I'm hand holding the ZF right now, and I personally am very pleased with the image quality out of the ZF also in video. I saw already a lot of professionals using this camera also in professional scenarios for both video and stills, so it can be definitely be a very good hybrid camera for you. The only downside is the dual card slot situation on the ZF. You do have dual card slots on the camera, but the second one is only in micro SD, which you definitely can use for stills backup. But in general, if you record video, Nikon doesn't allow you to record on both SD cards. So if you want to have your backup on the second one regarding video recording, that's not possible unfortunately today at the time of this recording, not even on the Z9 and Z8 flagships. On the other hand, Nikon has acquired RED, where they also lately released one specific video lens. Now there are also RED LUTs available, which you can put on your analog footage, which I'm doing right now. And therefore I'm quite positive that Nikon will somehow improve that also in the future via firmware update. At least I'm hoping for that. I hope you enjoyed my video about the Nikon ZF, and let me know if you are a Nikon ZF user or are you considering getting the Nikon ZF. Also let me know what you thought about the vlog footage on this VILTROX 20mm lens. How was the stabilization? How was the image quality? I'm curious what you think about that. Write it down below in the comments. If you made it until this point, thank you very much for your time. You are the one who deserves the like for that. Check my affiliate links below in the description if you want to support my small little channel, or buy me coffee. Link also in the description. And if you want to know what's in my Nikon ZF bag, just click on this video and have a nice day.